every time I think that priest is going to shoot that poor baby.
I love that picture. There's just so much wrong captured all in one photo. I love it.
It really, and it does really boil down to this idea that, human gumption can destroy this virus, or we can conquer this virus if we and it's like, I love inventiveness. I love this sort of stuff. But we saw from very early on how people sort of use this as kind of an outlet, and it was extremely unhelpful. Remember the restaurant owner that invented the 6-foot ring that he made his patrons wear?
Oh,
in order to keep distancing at the restaurant. I got to dig that up. I saved that, but there's a whole clown car of these solves, right?
Well,
where people,
Well, I was going to say, and then I thought you were going to talk about the igloos, like the outdoor dining.
Of course, all of it.
I can appreciate that. Like, if COVID had not been the impetus for really proliferating those, I could appreciate it, because I'm in a cold weather area, you're in a cold weather area. So that's kind of fun, like outdoor dining in the winter, right? And we're doing this igloo thing and it's warm and cozy, but like, because it kind of came into being because COVID, I look at it with disgust. So
totally.
Oh well.
The conversations about silver linings, and there were some good things that came out of the pandemic response. I guess it's undeniable, right? Like, there's always going to be one or two things that are like, oh, okay, even the working from home stuff, right? Which I did prior to 2020. I used to work in an office. I quit working in an office in order to work at home and freelance and, take on, project work. And when we started going virtual, I remember going, hey, be careful what you wish for, everybody, because, I used to work in an office with a bunch of people. I now work at home, done that for 2 years at the time. I'm like, there's benefits to both, but, it's like when I'm writing something like long form, it's great to sequester, right? You're at home, nobody else is here, which, by the way, is a big difference, because for the last 2 years, a lot of times our kids were here with us, our spouses were. It's like, it's not like a home office anymore. It's just like a home. But, that's definitely good. The outdoor dining, right, in New York City is interesting because, as somebody that eats out a lot in the city, that was a welcome thing. It was like, all right, fine. We can go to restaurants. There's not the capacity limitations. All these restaurateurs built, became carpenters overnight and built these huts outside. And now they're actually getting ready to take them down because, there's not a lot of parking in the city, and the neighborhoods don't like it that much. So
Sure. Well, along those lines, the little suburb that we live in now, because of COVID, they had done more outdoor dining and blocked off kind of one of the main streets, although it's not a street that they necessarily need for parking, just given the size of our little city here. And they put a tent over all of it. And then the restaurants on either side of the street, they can use all of it for outdoor dining. So, and they put it up again last summer as well. And they, I think, like May to October. And it's really nice. Like, it adds a nice, just cultural vibe and element. So yeah, that's something that I think wouldn't maybe have been done were it not for COVID. So I like that. I want them to hang on to that, but that doesn't mean that I'm happy about how the government responded to this virus. Just because innovation, there were some innovations that and changes that came about. That's just how humans are, right? That's
absolutely
what happens. We can make some lemonade out of lemons for sure, but doesn't justify the rest of it.
I'll do this in an episode next week, but we just got our foils back from our school board. We foiled mask decision. Because when you file a FOIL, you have to ask for terms, right? And so we asked for masks, masking, face coverings, and the idea being is we wanted some insight into how our board and our administration had decided on the protocols that they decided on. And it was a bit of a wrangle to get it because they denied it at first. We had to bring in lawyers. I'll take you through the whole saga. But the one point I'll make is I just started going through. It was a whole trove of emails and things, and who knows what's in there. But I started going through it. And the one thing that is really alarming, because I'm looking back at, the communications internally in March of 2020, right? And the things that they're talking about are very interesting. It kind of, it reminds you, sort of the headspace back then. But the one thing that was very interesting and alarming was the amount of vendors, mask suppliers, medical testing people, the HVAC people were already starting to contact the school boards, the administrators, the superintendents directly, saying, we can keep you safe.
Plexiglass makers.
Plexiglass people, sure. Absolutely.
Well, and there was money, right? I mean, they knew there was money coming down the pike for these safety measures. And so, sure, I mean, it makes good business sense for them, right, to jump on it and say, hey, these schools are going to get money and they're going to need to spend it because it's going to be earmarked for these things. But yeah, what a waste. What a waste.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you're reading it, like, these are companies, right? These are companies with people that own them, people that work for them, right? These are salaries, these are mortgages. And, this is where what we're doing becomes really cancerous and insidious. This big COVID, this big safety kind of regime that's firmly implanted in our culture now. We really have to work to extract it. But anyway, I'll go, again, I'm going to have a fun time reading all those emails this weekend. But anyway, we didn't introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Eric Hartman, trying to save the world here from Westchester, New York.
And I'm Jessica Hockett, and I'm trying to do the same from DuPage County, Illinois. So nice. we're doing okay. Well,
so we have a small update legally here in New York, and I'll do that real quick. And then you have some funny business, well, not really funny business, but interesting stuff happening there in Illinois. And then we can get into the San Francisco thing. But here in New York, there's been several lawsuits. There's been a lot of lawsuits around the country. But here in New York, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the Massapequa lawsuit, which kind of came out of nowhere, which was great. Got pretty far up, gave our kids 1 day of mask-free bliss, and then they stayed it, and then they stayed it again. So now we're waiting for an appeal. It's going to be a long time. But this is our mask lawsuit, and it's right here. And it's a group out of Western New York, a group of moms and lawyers who got together very early. And we actually were connected because we're in central southern New York here in Westchester. But we got connected to the moms and dads in Western New York, which is Erie County, way over. And it's honestly like the other deep blue part of the state, right? There's two parts of the state that really control the politics of New York, and it's the city and it's Western New York. And it's a whole saga there because their county executive has been declaring, states of emergency every 21 days or something. I don't know what the official tally is, but it's just over and over and over again, really under the thumb of this authoritarian, safetyist regime. But this is where this lawsuit came out of. And this is the same group of moms and lawyers that actually opened our schools last year. They filed a lawsuit, again, the same group. And that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back here when Cuomo was still our governor and it got our schools open. Obviously, it was combined with the efforts that we were having here, advocacy, doing our rallies and stuff. But that's where this was. They won that open up the schools lawsuit. They started this mask lawsuit. And again, it's a different legal way in than the other ones. And I just applaud all of these ways. I'm just like, whatever way in you can take to get the masks off the kids and punish these people, I'm all for. So this was filed this week on Wednesday, I think, here in Westchester. Nice. Yeah. So, I'm not going to read the whole thing, and I will provide the link. But again, this is a big deal, and hopefully we can have the lawyers come on and actually explain a little bit of the legal theory behind this, because again, it's, different lawsuits go at different pain points, right? Or different, use different levers to try and undo this stuff. So hopefully we can get him in and have him kind of talk through so we can all, be educated about this stuff. But this is good news.
Yeah, it's great news. And also I think people in various states and locations, even though, they may have different laws, there's always some takeaways or implications or yeah, just strategies that may be applicable to your state or to your jurisdiction. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm for any and all entry points, just throwing it all at the wall and hoping that something will stick, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
when you were first telling me about the temporary restraining order, I was like, what? I'm not a lawyer,
right.
but that is something that I hadn't even heard discussed. And you, the people that have done this to us have used all sorts of red tape, right? And
Sure.
bureaucratic and legal confusion to do what they've done.
Hmm.
Therefore, ergo, we should be using and trying to exploit any and all red tape, legal outlets. That's why we were interested in the bonds for the wind thing. It's like, all right, it could be that. It could be anything. Who knows?
Right.
It's all so complicated and infuriating.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and our overlords have basically said to themselves and to their lawyers and to the people that work for them, like, I want to do this, make it so. Right. So I think that's why we've seen all these circuitous sort of pathways
Oh,
that
absolutely.
governors and public health officials have taken. They're just trying to, there's an action that they want to take that's not exactly lawful. But they want to make it happen no matter what. And there's all kinds of smoke and mirrors and circular reasoning. And they've kind of tied it all up. So you really have, a lot of us have really turned this into our, the unmask the kids, open the schools into a full-time job, right? Or an unpaid hobby, because it really does take like an army of people closely following this.
It's a lot of work
to get these people, right, to uncover what they've been doing and to fight for what our kids should rightfully have.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about this a lot too. Like, we have had to become, in order to do this, in order to advocate for our kids, in order to advocate for freedom, we've had to get good at a lot of things that might be outside of our normal bailiwick, right? Like, you come from an educational background. I come from a marketing background. And I think that honestly, our backgrounds probably help us when we learn about these things. But, from the get-go, you start reading studies and learning about virology and immunology and, the history, going down all these rabbit holes. I remember when I first found out who Fauci was, and that it wasn't at first. I had a couple old gay friends of mine in New York City. As soon as his name was brought up, they were like, "Oh no!" And I'm like, "What? This kindly old bureaucrat? Why? How could you say anything wrong about? He's here to help." And they were like, "Oh, you need to do some research on that guy." And
and they were so right. They were so
God.
right. You go back and you look at videos of things that he said, or articles and things at the time, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is like 2.0 for this guy. He's tried this all before."
We should do a whole thing on him because
really
it's a nightmare. But the same sort of armchair, expertise that we've had to get on, the medical stuff. We're now, having to get on the legal stuff, and the governmental stuff. It's not just Schoolhouse Rock, right? It is, but it's not. It's a lot more complicated. They've completely complicated the crap out of our government systems, and it kind of feels like it's out of control a little bit. So maybe we can get a wrangle on this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of that, in Illinois, is this a good time to talk about Illinois,
Oh yeah,
the latest
yeah.
development
Let's pivot.
in the worst state in the union? We were waiting on. There was a TRO that was issued by a Judge Raylene Brishow in Sangamon County, to which school districts responded to in, shall we say, very, very different ways. Some districts interpreted the ruling to mean, and this was a few weeks ago on the 4th of February, to mean, okay, like, we're mask optional now. And other districts said, nope, that doesn't mean that. Or, hey, we were defendants on the suit, and this TRO technically only applies to the students who were named, but not everybody else. And so we had a little bit of chaos, shall we say, and a sense of injustice, especially among high school students who were at schools that had said, nope, you still have to wear a mask. And then their friends, maybe in the next town over, did not have to wear a mask. So we saw the great mask rebellion at some high schools, and some kids getting suspended and expelled and things like that. But the decision was appealed. And so we had been waiting for the 4th District Appellate Court in Illinois to issue some kind of ruling about it. And so we did get that late last night at midnight. And, come on, like, I know why they did this. I know why the timing, why they waited. And it was because this is a Friday, and if they issued it, or I think it's because if this is a Friday, and if they issued the ruling late enough, then schools wouldn't really have to do anything about it, right? Depending on how they interpreted the ruling. So late night ruling, and I'll pull up the actual, I'm not going to go through the ruling, but I'll pull up, because I was waiting. I kept refreshing. I go to bed late anyway, but I kept refreshing. And so this is the first page. Is that showing up, Eric, on the screen?
It is not yet, but we will. There we go.
There we go. Boom. So the order here, like the first line, appeal is dismissed as moot. And so I just like tweeted that. I'm like, hey, breaking news.
I saw that. That was the
appeal
quote.
Dismissed as moot. Yeah. And I did scan, the rest of the explanation, but it was so late at night. I'm like, I am not going to even try to attempt to go through this and the implications. Like, that's just tweet, bed. That's what I did. But I did, look at it again this morning. And of course, there's all kinds of commentary on Twitter and people reacting to it, and now school districts reacting to it. And, this is something we can go over more maybe in depth next week. But basically the court, they sort of washed their hands of it. We had an action earlier this week. It's a little complicated to explain, but basically a legislative committee said no to the Illinois Department of Public Health's attempt to refile some emergency rules that were at issue in this case. So, whether or not you want to say those rules were legally or illegally instituted, which Judge Grishow had said illegally, but they tried to refile them with this legislative committee, and the legislative committee, which is a bipartisan committee called JCAR, said no. And the reason they said no is, hey, this is being adjudicated, right? Like, we can't do it. So
saw that.
So what the appellate, but it's kind of funny because the appellate court is like, well, this is moot because JCAR just rejected the attempt to renew these rules. So it's a little circular, right? Like, it's like the legislative branch pointing at the court, and then the court is pointing back. And this decision, they said, look, the rules aren't in force right now anyway, legal or not legal. They haven't been renewed. JCAR rejected that. So there's nothing for us to rule on when it comes to whether there's something to restrain, right? A temporary restraining order. We're not going to rule on that because it doesn't really matter right now anyway, because the rules they haven't been renewed. That's basically what they said. They're sort of washing their hands of it, and they haven't ruled on the merits of the case. And one of the dissenting judges, or she concurred in part, and then actually I don't know if it's a man or woman, Justice Holder White, but concurred in part and dissented in part. And that judge said, like, look, we haven't really addressed the issue here of whether the executive order and the emergency rules that were keeping this all in place is even lawful. Like, that still needs to be addressed. Right. So, I see it as a win for now, but it's like everybody keeps skirting around the issue of whether Governor Pritzker's EO and the emergency rules were actually legal. And it's like nobody wants to say that out loud. I mean, Judge Grishow did. She said, no, absolutely not. But now we've got the legislative and judicial branch just kind of pointing their fingers at each other. So it's frustrating from that point of view. And we had CPS, Chicago Public Schools, largest district in the state, come out this morning in their email and, say it was like a victory for them to be able to keep masking. And it's like, well, not really. No, like what you're doing is still not lawful according to the circuit court. So we can have some lawyers on and have a good discussion about it. But I'm kind of waiting to see what the governor's next move is, right? Is he going
Yeah.
to try to, I don't know that he could appeal this, but I think the Supreme Court, Illinois Supreme Court, would just simply say that it was moot, like move on. Does it go, are they going to try to refile these rules and or legislate them in some way? I mean,
Yep.
it's just going to be really interesting to see what he does.
Yeah, we're going to have another lawyer fest on here next Tuesday, I think. But yeah, I mean, that's what's been so frustrating, right? The circular nature of this. And you're absolutely right. And it seems like the circular nature is benefiting kids for this one, at least, right? It's still messy, but the default interpretation of it is, with the exception of some of these crazy districts, is mask optional, masks come off. But, for 2 years, we've seen that same circular dysfunction ratchet the other way, right? Where it's, nobody can kind of tell who's actually in charge or where the power actually lies,
right.
But therefore we need to keep doing this, or we need to keep your business closed, or we need to keep your kids out of school. Mm-hmm. So it feels like forward positive momentum that these things are starting to cut the other way. Obviously, politics is playing a large part in that. And again, I'll take it. I don't care.
Sure.
I mean, I do care, but we'll take it and then we'll care.
It's better than them overturning. I mean, that's yes. For sure. But it feels a little bit like the Abbott and Costello, who's on first routine, right? And parents are like, what does this mean? And districts are responding in different ways. It's still chaos, which our governor loves, right? Like
they do.
They love the chaos.
And they like to appear to solve things. It's very interesting. Somebody tweeted yesterday. Everybody's tweeted this, but it was somebody tweeted got some viral hits, and somebody said something about the truckers. It said, well, here's an idea. Maybe just instead of declaring economic warfare and arresting everybody, why don't you just get rid of the mandates? You know what I mean?
Sure. Right.
And
right.
The answer to that is, unfortunately, the simplest solution is often kind of thrown out by these people, because there's this weird assumption that, take COVID, for example, right? Like, watching out for yourself. Don't go out when you're sick. Wash your hands. Don't touch your eyeballs. Like, those are on the chart of mitigations. Those are the most effective ones. Like by far, those are like 99% of, known help, preventing of, viral infection. And same thing here, same thing there. And all this, it's like the authoritarians, the bureaucrat class, the people, the politicians, they desperately want to come across as having solved something. And they can't do that if it's a simple solution, like don't touch your eyeball or, choice, right? You know what I mean? Like they have to overcomplicate these things in order to craft a situation where they can politic.
Right.
And it's severely unhelpful.
Right. Well, I don't know if you've seen my graphic. I tweet it all the time that, just says, okay, here's my plan for unmasking.
Yes,
and I have a little bubble that says everyone.
Same thing.
And then it, like mask if you want to, don't mask if you don't want to. Like that's it. That's the solution. And that should not be seen as innovative or controversial in the least, but yet it is, right? It's like, no, we can't just do that. Well, why not? Right. So I don't get it.
Well, and real quick to your other point about, figuring out the crux of this, right? The emergency powers. We talked about this, like prior to 2020, there was precedent on emergency powers, and they had a 30-day limit, and they were definitively, assumed to be around things like a hurricane, right? Or, some major thing that you just needed to kind of, do martial law for a couple of days, keep people from going out and getting hurt or whatever. But they have parlayed this into, from state to state, varying degrees of never-ending emergency. And some state houses have done something about it, others haven't. And you're right, it still exists. And until we knock that down, this is going to continue to some degree. And the same thing in a different way is about the mask lawsuits. And back to our suit real quick, one thing that our lawyers did that I really, really liked was that they actually put in some arguments about the data, about the science, about
Nice.
masks, how they
Yeah.
don't work. And, we haven't seen that a lot. We didn't see that in the Supreme Court. I know that was frustrating to a lot of us.
Mhm.
And the legal explanation for that was, you don't go in, you don't argue emotion with the judges. You stick to a sliver of constitutionality or whatever the law, and you fight that, and you win that, and it's supposed to be impartial. But that's not the way it's going, right? Like you
Right.
go in with that, and we saw it. SCOTUS is the best example. That lawyer was all in that sliver. This is constitutional. This is not constitutional. And here Sotomayor comes out. There's 10 million kids and with long
100,000
COVID,
kids.
and it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God, if you don't disabuse them of these things, we're going to continue to lose. And so again, our lawsuit actually, thankfully, started hitting at that stuff. So
That's nice. I know I know Liberty Justice Center filed a suit on behalf of 8 residents against the city of Chicago and Cook County over their vaccine passport mandate. And I know that they've enlisted, and it'll come out as the case goes forward, but they enlisted expert to write up data and research on that supports the idea that no, we don't need these vaccine mandates, because these claims that you're
Right.
making, that the city is making database claims like because Omicron, because hospital. So if they're going to make those claims, then you need to fight their sweeping claims about data with the actual data, right? Like you're not going to be able to get around that, I don't think, at some point. But overall, just to close out the Illinois thing for right now, I am encouraged. It is a step forward rather than a step backward, and I'm encouraging people today to sort of troll our governor. I encourage that anyway. But every time the governor of Illinois tweets today, people need to reply with the word, maybe the hashtag moot. Just hey, moot. No matter
It's fun
what
to
he
say,
does. But
too.
just go after it. It's awesome to say.
rolls
It's
off
awesome
the
to say. Right. Hey,
mouth.
moot, Governor Moot. We can just call him that. Moot. We could do that as well. So
I see where you're going there.
yeah,
Little
exactly.
poke there.
Yep. So I'll take it. I'll take the win.
Agree.
Sure.
I hate it. Look, congratulations. Not yucking the yum here, right? But man, they took away so many of our freedoms so quickly. And so, so wholesale, and we are clawing them back in pieces over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And we're celebrating when we get like scraps of, our basic innate human rights back. And
Right.
it's
Thank you
insane.
for the crumbs. Thank you for the crumbs.
Ugh.
So what's going on with San Francisco? I know you wanted to bring that up. About
Well, San
situation out
Francisco did something really amazing, and so we had they had the recall election for Newsom, and that did not go well. It was Larry Elder was sort of the Republican leader on that, and I think it was kind of an abysmal failure, right? They got a lot of signatures pretty quick to recall him,
there.
and then when the election happened, like only 30%. I'm probably messing up the numbers, but it wasn't that close, unfortunately. And so we knew that some of the San Francisco parents were very upset with the schools. And obviously our friend Jennifer Say left San Francisco because of this and moved to Denver. Other people have moved. A lot of our friends are still there fighting the fight. Miserable, absolutely miserable. And along the way, for the last 2 years, not only, and this has happened in a lot of districts, but not only did San Francisco schools, public schools especially, keep schools closed way too long. I mean, they should have never been closed in the first place, but kept them, closed way past, the evidence was in, the masks, the restrictions, all this stuff. Not only did they not fix that and not engage with parents on that, they focused their energy, their money, and their community organizing, I guess, into really woke, overly progressive things like, renaming schools and, for social justice leaders and all this kind of performative, theatrical, perfunctory BS, frankly. And this is while, millions of children were suffering. They were sliding backwards. They were having mental health issues, and the parents were, clamoring and demanding, an audience with this. And again, we have had it very bad where we are. they've had it really, really bad. And so they actually managed to initiate a recall of these three school board officials.
It's so awesome.
Yeah, it is. And
Goals.
yeah, it was funny. And I'm not going to go super into the depths here, but there were three of them. And they were, and it's funny because even the mayor, London Breed of San Francisco, again, what did she say when she was caught maskless in that jazz club? She was feeling the spirit.
She was feeling the spirit. So she took her mask off.
Yeah, she's interesting. I'd like to actually get some more insight into the mayor of San Francisco from some of our friends that live there, because she's interesting. She's a wokey, but I think that she's got there's like a little piece of reality DNA in this woman. So I'm kind of cheering that on. But anyway, she actually supported the recall of these three. So it included the school board president, Gabriela Lopez, who has since declared this recall as a white supremacist event. I'll bring up the tweet in a second. Vice President Fauga Maliga and Commissioner Allison Collins. The vice president, Maliga, actually, I thought his response on Twitter was a little contrite. In a good way. I think he was the most humbled of these three. The other two doubled down, it seems. And let me just pull up a couple other things here. I think, by the way, we were talking about this. Twitter Blue allows us to save bookmark folders. And so
I love that. I did subscribe this week. Did I tell you? I did. It's like $3 a month. I'm sure they'll increase it over time, but I don't know that it decreases my chances of being, expunged by Twitter. Probably not.
We'll take you out anyway.
I love the bookmark folders. That's so helpful for me. So yeah, that's a score.
Hold on. I just need to get it working.
While you pull that up, we noticed that in this area where we used to live for 14 years in Evanston, which is definitely social justice warrior central. But what I noticed, and as you noted earlier, I've worked with schools for 20 years, but I noticed there and in other parts around the country where school boards have sort of forgotten what their actual job is. In a big picture sense, a school board has two jobs. You make policy and you manage the money. Those are the two big picture things. And it seems like a lot of school boards have gotten into this, like, we're in this advocacy business. And not just for
join the club.
Right. I'm in the advocacy business too, but like in their roles where they have to like make all these decisions about curriculum and what kids should learn and these things that are really way outside their lane, or they're building their resume for like their next political endeavor. And all of a sudden
it's a launching board.
Yeah, you look up and you're like, wait a minute, none of this is really your job, and what are you really using this role in this position for? You guys are way off here in like left field, and you need to get back to what your real job is. And we've seen that with COVID too, right? Where these school boards have turned into mini like arms of the health department, right? And you're like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be doing this. This isn't your job under the
Agreed.
law.
A whole lot of people not only not doing their job, they're doing jobs that aren't their job.
Yeah, right. Other people's jobs. Yep.
I would say that dovetails with our corporation discussion from the Super Bowl as well. It's very similar to how our companies and brands, again, back to Jen Say, and Levi's is a great recent example, but how companies have shifted their focus from their products and their services into these political ideals, and these in this advocacy, and it's odd. Again, it's like these people embraced advocacy of, I guess, some things that people once thought were important. I think that they have figured out, at least the parents have figured out, that they may even agree with these things still, but they're certainly not as important as kids being physically in school, learning, reading, writing, arithmetic. This stuff is, it's just
following
because it's
the law.
Right. Yeah. those old chestnuts.
Yeah.
And it goes, I think it's, in my mind, it's very similar to this aversion to simple, right? If it's simple and if it's old school, then it's out, right? We have to come up with novel, new, technologically advanced ways of solving things. And like, it really is like this theory over reality
Yep.
Right? We've seen it over and over and over again. So anyway,
So who's this? Who's this a picture
this
of?
is
The double masker.
This is Allison Collins here. And I think that this is behind her, Gabriela Lopez. And the reason I brought up Twitter Blue is I was able to make a bookmark folder and have these tweets all in a row, right? So I don't have to jump from tab to tab. A little behind the scenes production. But I don't know who Meredith Dodson is. I just picked up some that I thought were pretty good commentary here. But again, parents have emerged as one of the most potent forces in politics today, and woe to anyone seen as standing in the way of their kids' education, right? LA Times had a really good article on it. And it pretty fair too. Liberal San Francisco school board. I mean, this was, I think that they thought it was going to be close. It was a blowout. These three people got spanked. Here comes Jim Jordan. Things are going bad for Democrats when even parents in San Francisco are calling them politicians.
Yeah, well,
he's not wrong.
That's the truth. Yeah,
he's not wrong. Obviously, he quotes. He grabs the Fox News article, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. And here's the Chronicle. This is the original one. And this is again the three that got booted. Here's Jesse. This column is basically, what if the San Francisco school board fight isn't about the issues it's about, but rather, but other much more racist issues from the past. Again, this is where, CNN and some of these other tweets, start to come in and try and shift the learning here, right? This is absolutely about what we just talked about. It's about COVID. It's about, sort of misplaced energies, right? And monies on things that don't matter. And also, this was a huge Asian pushback, right? And I think that it's that is a much bigger discussion. But the Asian involvement in progressiveness is very interesting, because what we saw in San Francisco here is the Asian community was like, screw you. They drove a lot of this. They don't feel like that they're being paid attention to. They feel like they're being used, and they came out in force. So
what's the thrust of the CNN piece? They're saying that the ouster was racist. I mean, I guess when in doubt, CNN just calls things racist. But is that their main, right?
It's funny. This is the one I did not read.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost what it looks like from the
Yeah,
it sends a dangerous. What's the dangerous message there?
That you're not
the dangerous constitutional message that we the people have a voice and there's a process for getting people out of office when they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. Danger.
Danger, Will Robinson.
Yeah, constitutional message.
Let's see. Well, the dangerous message. Let me. I'm going to guess before I do this. The dangerous message is that parents thinking that they have a say-so in their kids' education is very dangerous.
Right, dangerous message. We can't let that happen. We can't let that happen.
Oh, she's at Columbia U. Oh, she's on the Obama presidency oral history project. This is going to go straight at, because of these. Sorry, I'm just reading this real quick. It's exactly what we think it is. Okay, they're going back into, so they did, try and address, some of these issues that have been, in their district for a long time. I have no idea. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I do have another one. Yeah, I do have another one saved. I think that encapsulates that pretty well. Hold on one sec. And it is a tweet from somebody I'd seen. I didn't really know who this guy is. David Roberts. Can you see this?
Not yet. No.
There we go. Boom. All right. So this is in response to an AP article. So there was a San Francisco Gate article and an AP article, and I know they kind of feed off of each other, right? They share notes, but they were both about the larger political state here, right? Which is Democrats are either underwater or going underwater at an alarming clip. And so what David Roberts did here was kind of try and push back, and actually just to steel man, right, this argument, just kind of give the other side their due. I thought that this is a perfect encapsulation of someone who is answering your question, which is, this recall election was not about the things that we said it was about, but in fact, it's about this. So it's not that long, but I'll read it. So I wasn't going to respond to this aggravating AP article, but it is in my nature. I want to make 2 quick points on it. Of course, their 2 quick points are, 23 freaking tweets, but we're not going to do them all. But anyway, the AP News article, we can link it, is just that the polls for Dems are absolutely, and the Dem brand is so toxic that Dems fear extinction in rural United States, right? Which is absolutely true. Is absolutely true. And let's see here. I'm not going to go through all these, but the Dems that people in these areas hate bear virtually no resemblance to real life Dems. It doesn't matter what Fetterman or any other ostentatiously in touch with working people candidate says. They'll never hear it. They'll just hear lies about him. That's the root of it. You see the same thing from the right. Right. Sometimes like you try and say like, that's not us. And honestly, he's not wrong here. Right. There is a marked difference between Democrats in the cities and Democrats in rural areas. And so hold on, there was one really good one that I liked.
Or socialists in the city. I mean, so many people I know who are still identifying themselves as Democrat. I mean, I don't even know that I would identify them as Democrat. They're socialist, Marxist. I mean, they're way left, versus like my actual Democrat friends are like, well, I'm like, they say they're classical liberals, right? So, but they say I'm not voting for a Democrat again anytime soon because of what policies have been enacted under their leadership and what those policies have done to, my family.
Yes.
So
totally. And I think that the fact that the political landscape is not, even across the United States, it's like, it's a complication. I know we don't like to think like that. We like to think that everybody's the same, but they're not. And this is not new news from the sky. But here's sort of the crux of the pushback. And again, I'll read the CNN article, but my bet is that it's kind of around these 2 points, which is, and yet go back to the original AP piece. It's not that that's not urbanites disdaining ruralites. It's the opposite. It's diverse urban populations being effectively invisible in political media in favor of biweekly check-ins with MAGA hats and rural diners. It's a faux populism all the way down. I don't see that. I don't know where David Roberts is getting that. I watch all the cable networks. I try and flip around a bunch. I don't see that. I really don't.
Yeah, I don't either. I think this is a straw man for him.
It is. I think he's making that up. But the next tweet here, I think, is really where the nut is. Consider, have you ever in your life a single time seen a piece in mainstream media framing it as a problem that the GOP has completely lost cities, that the party's brand is toxic in urban areas? Are any Republicans taken to task for that or forced to answer for it? One might think it is striking, worthy of comment, that the nation's most educated, its high-skilled professionals, its scientists and its scholars, its non-white working class, its minorities and single women and immigrants have utterly rejected the GOP. Seems like a thing.
Where does he live? He lives in San Francisco?
Let's see. Well, he has a newsletter called Volts WTF.
Followers too. Yeah, I don't connect with what he's saying, and it's not just because I have a completely different point of view. I think which I do, but I think he's in a bubble. That's what I think.
He is. I think you're right. But I thought that this last one actually had some merit, which is the reason I'm sharing it, because I read the articles, and obviously, look, we're all seeing the same thing. We're seeing it even here in New York, which is very blue. The lines are like this, right? And sure. It's funny because I actually think that they've crossed a while ago, but these are lagging indicators, and the progressives really do believe this. They believe that the best people. Right. That's what this tweet is saying, that the best people, the most sophisticated people are Democrats.
Sure.
Right. They are not conservatives. They are not GOP. And again, GOP does not necessarily mean conservative, but it is the other option right now. And they're the least bad. Like they're the ones that are not authoritarians currently.
Yeah, they're on the line here. In Illinois, they're guilty by association, I would say, by not doing anything. But, but still, right, they've maybe advocated less strongly for the things that have hurt people, I would
Yeah.
say, at least on the COVID front. But I mean, I think your broader point is correct, like that these like dichotomies, or this continued effort to dichotomize people into just, into two parties. I just think all of this over the past couple of years has really blurred the lines for people, right? And there's a lot of people who say that they feel politically homeless, or they no longer identify as this or that. I mean, I've said that I never really had a political identity myself. I maybe lean conservative in a lot of things, but I wondered out loud a few weeks ago, I'm like, am I libertarian? Is that and then the National Libertarian Party replied to me, and they're like, welcome. It was pretty funny, but it's like, yeah, I don't know really what I am. I just know that I don't want any part of a government that did just what they did for the past couple of years. So what does
Yes.
that make me? I don't know.
Right.
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 So
Right. And it's funny because there is a local Dem that I'm friendly with, and I was talking with him, and it's a weird environment right now because, again, we're in a blue state, but the sort of the default traditional old school liberal Democrats are, they're a dying breed. Like, I don't even, they're getting, either people are leaving and going, to vote Republican or be independent because of exactly what you just said, or they're in crazy town with David Roberts here,
right,
in this
right.
bubble where, they think that they're right, and they think everybody else is a dummy. And it's very interesting because I'm an independent as well. I'm actually a registered Republican currently, but that was a completely strategic registration. I was registered Dem when I lived in the city, and that was just because, where we live, sometimes these decisions are made in the primaries, right? And so you
Right.
have to, if you want to have a say so, that's where you do it. And so, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think too, back to your earlier point about like the school boards and then the San Francisco recall. I mean, I think I've been calling it spring cleaning to friends. Like, I think maybe more people are waking up to their local school boards and how important the people in those positions really are, right? Like, they have been given a lot of power in this scenario, rightfully or unrightfully, and we
Or
need
they took it.
a lot, yeah, right, or they took it, they seized it, and we need a lot more resignations is what I'm saying. We've had some in the Chicago area, like school board members stepping down and saying, like, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't, this has been a really stressful couple of years. I'm like, great, let's see more of that, because I think for a lot of communities to kind of move on past this, the people who have been in these positions during these COVID times, like they just need to move. They need to move on, right?
Yeah.
So that people can start over, even if they weren't. And I'm not saying all these people did something morally wrong or sinned or committed crimes or anything, but just, I think to a certain extent, not just at the state politician level or the national level, but at the hyper local level, we're going to need to see some turnover so that people can start afresh.
Yeah.
Right. And get rid of like the baggage that's associated with some of their local school board members whose faces maybe they have never seen.
Yeah.
By the way, because the school board members keep covering their faces.
That's true. That's true.
So.
But, in before times, we were certainly guilty of this, but we didn't pay as much attention to that as we should have. I mean, our kids were very little, and the school districts were really good, right? Which is why we moved where we moved. And we just kind of gave them the keys, and we get their updates. We read the stuff. We went to board meetings occasionally. We tried to keep eye on the stuff, but the woke stuff had not come in yet, and obviously COVID had not hit yet. So it was more about, like, you're looking at their grades, and if there was a the budget was always a big one. Like, what are they going to spend the budget on? They're going to fix the roof or whatever. These are the kinds of things we looked at prior to 2020.
Right. If there was a school, they were going to close a school maybe because attendance numbers were or enrollment was down. Do you know what I mean? Like those
Yes.
big issues, or we're going to build a new school, or should
Yep.
we add a gym onto this school, right?
Right.
Like those
Those are,
because they impact your like referendum type of topics, right? Like those would bring people out just because it affects your, your property taxes. At least in Illinois, that's how it would work. So those issues have kind of always brought out people to board meetings.
Well, and to be fair, to the board members, again, there were some pretty awful ones. I don't know even if our board, I wouldn't say that they're bad people. I think, a couple of them are, were kind of rotten, throughout all this, but I do have a degree of sympathy for them in terms of something like this, right? This is a big deal. The pandemic comes through, everybody's freaking out. You have, 85% of the parents are like, shut everything down, my God,
Right.
And then you have the 15 which are us going, what are you doing? So you have to kind of weigh this stuff, and you have national, state, county, all doing the same thing, which is not my problem, or, they're the one, we're going to follow their guidance, or we're going to follow their guidance. And the school boards, in a lot of ways, were, at the same time caught in the middle, and it was a weird position to be in. And I think
front line.
They were on the front line. Exactly.
Really, with parents anyway.
Right. And I think that I do have some sympathy and empathy for the idea that they're kind of like, why is this our call? Like, our school board consistently pointed to the state, right? Even when the state was not, consistent or even clear, or, whatever, they wanted to be told what to do for this. Right. They don't want to be told what to do with the budget and the roof and the, whatever. But for this, they were like, this is outside of our wheelhouse. This is beyond our pay grade. We don't want to get sued. And again, I get a lot of that. And I do think that overall idea, that question, right? And this is something we struggle with. It's like, whose decision is it? I'm a super hyper local guy in general. That said, I don't know if masks, there's something about how heavy they are. They're such a big deal, right? And that's why I've tended towards a state decree on this. And it's tough because I know that, Virginia's struggling with this, Florida's been struggling with this. And I agree that there's constitutional issues with banning them, right? Like it's a tough thing. But I guess my point is I do understand how school boards honestly don't want to touch it. They don't want to deal with it.
Well,
I get it.
Because under the law, I can speak for Illinois. Under the law, the school district is not a public health entity, right? And our counties have public health agencies, and in situations of breakouts or, pathogens or managing these things, it's actually, you might enlist a school board, especially not a school board, but a superintendent in the instance of like a norovirus breakout. Right. Like,
and we've done that. It's like one or two schools throughout the nation a year, closed for a couple days.
You close for a couple days. The health department investigates. That typically has not involved every kid having to get tested and everybody quarantined. None of that garbage. It's just a couple day closure. They find out what was causing it or what they think was causing it, and then they move on. That's about the extent of it, right? But instead, what we saw the past couple years, again, at least in Illinois, was now these school boards have been given this sense of responsibility over COVID management and mitigation, and like started to measure like their own success and identity around COVID numbers, right? And displaying COVID dashboards at every board meeting. And that, I'm like, am I at the health department meeting? Like, why are we even doing, are we going to see a diarrhea dashboard?
It's same everywhere.
It is the same everywhere, but people are so outside their lane, right? And they've forgotten that actually none of this is their job. None of it whatsoever.
It comes back to this pretending that they're doing something, that they're accomplishing something. They've set these ridiculous new standards of safe, and they have this grab bag of metrics, right? Which is like tests and hospitalizations, and it's like all fraught. It's all flawed, but they are using this and they have their charts and they seem smart, they think, but they're not.
Well, and I think we have, I don't know if do we have time for one more thing? Or
we do. And actually I had a couple quick things to wrap up. So you can go ahead.
Yep. Go ahead.
Oh, do you want me to go first? Okay. So I just had
Go first.
to,
Go first.
you've seen these, but just in the spirit of sharing, kind of big deal information with our audience and, even us to keep it top, because there's so much, right? It's like a fire hose of data and information on us every single day. But this is a big deal. And this is a study that came out that just, it's yet another one that shows what we have known, thankfully, for 2 years. And that is immunocompromised children and young people are at no increased risk of severe illness from COVID.
Go figure.
Right. And again, it encapsulates kind of what we've been up against for 2 years, where the urban legend, the wives' tale of the worst case scenario has been driving so much of our policy, right? It's the but what ifs. It's the better safe than sorries, right? It's, kids can be super silent super spreaders. And it's like, well, they're not, but they could be. And that's how they plan. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with officials, administrators, politicians, local parents, mostly people that disagree with us, that pull and play the immunocompromised card, whether they claim that they have an immunocompromised child or that they know somebody that does, and the super spread can get to them. But this is very important, because if you look at the data, if you look at the results, it literally doesn't happen that much. Thank goodness. Right. And I just want everybody, again, this is ammo, right, for people when they're having discussions, because everybody throws out these emotional claims.
Right.
Right. And that's pretty much what this pandemic disaster, this reaction disaster, has been based on, has been emotions. And the conclusion here is the study shows that SARS-CoV-2 infections have occurred in immunocompromised children, young people, with no increased risk of severe disease.
Sure.
No children died.
Well, part of it too, I would imagine, I haven't read through, I saw the study, but I haven't read through it, is that
I put it in the link
immunocompromised
or in the description.
Immunocompromised is not really a diagnosis, right? Like, well, it's like, well, what do you mean you're immunocompromised? And I'm not saying it's a fake thing. That's not what I'm saying. But like, what matters more is the reason that you're immunocompromised. And I'm glad a study like this came out, because it's like, let's stop using this word as though like everybody who can call themselves, rightfully immunocompromised is at this like greatly heightened risk of severe outcomes from SARS-CoV-2 infection. It's just that claim is just it's assumed for some reason, but it's
assumed.
Completely unsubstantiated. And I think too, from a school perspective, I can speak to this, medically fragile children with all kinds of conditions have always existed.
Yes.
Always. And sometimes those conditions matter more for school accommodations, and sometimes they don't. It just depends. Some kids are so medically fragile, or they're going through certain cancer treatments or things like that, that they can't be in school. And at least in a public system, and again, just speaking to Illinois, but I'm sure the same is true in other states as well, those children are actually entitled under the law to homebound tutors. Like, we don't relegate those kids to Zoom. They actually have one-on-one teachers that come to their house, and the district pays for them, or they come to the hospital. Now, it's kind of a, quote, high bar that you have to meet, right?
And it should be, frankly.
And it should be, right? But I think we have a culture of almost like a Munchausen's by proxy, if you will, amongst
That's
some
exactly
parents
what it is,
who are like, my kid had RSV when he was 4 and he was hospitalized. And so you're like, well, okay, but what does that have to do with this? And so that's really, I think, the population that school districts now are still having to deal with, all these so-called immunocompromised people that may or may not be. But again, we've always accommodated those kids. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a kid whose doctor has said, you can go to school, but only if everybody else is wearing a Paw Patrol mask. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, who is the doctor that says it's safe? It's safe for
you
on
Twitter.
If everyone's wearing a mask.
There's certainly several of them on Twitter.
Like, school is dangerous for you unless everybody else is wearing a mask. Like I am very, very, and if that is the case, then accommodations need to be made, but not accommodations that abrogate the rights and health, including mental health, of other kids, right? We've never demanded, no one's ever demanded that my daughter do X, Y, or Z because a kid in the class or a kid in the school has a certain condition. I suppose peanut butter would be
peanut butter. We talked about that,
but she's not like ceding her rights there. I mean, that, yeah, we did talk about that. And yeah, that kind of safetyism is the kind of thinking that has gotten us where we are, right? I mean, I do think that those are related, but the peanut butter thing, I don't think has ever asked of other students the kind of thing that the mask mandates have, you know, when they're being promoted in the name of immunocompromised children.
And I'd like to see data on immunocompromised in general. Obviously, this study was about immunocompromised children, right? And again, that's driving so much of the school, right? It really is. Like when you talk to administrators, that's who they've decided that they're protecting, right? And it doesn't exist, at least to the level that they think it does. So I put this link to the study in the description of the video. Again, I'm a big fan of, ammo for sending to people, right? You know, I write our school board every week. You know, I write our politicians probably every week or every other week, and I include the latest stuff. And it's less that I think that I'm going to change their mind necessarily. I might, you know, it's building up. But a lot of this is going on the record, right, with this sort of stuff, which is when you email somebody who's public, like your board of ed or your representative, that's FOIA, that's public information. And, you know, it gets to a point where it's literally like, you know, hey, you can't say that you weren't warned. And I actually think that that's something that we should all be doing a lot more of, because we're almost in that phase of, did you know better? Because a lot of people are going to claim that they didn't know better, right? They're going to claim ignorance. They're going to claim, oh, we wanted to be better safe and sorry because we didn't know. And part of what I've been doing for the last, you know, probably year and a half is just flooding them with information so they can't see that.
Right. Yeah. You were told, and I have the receipts. I also like to do things like send letters to public officials, and just for my own sake, right? So that I can see what I said. I mean, a couple of years ago, this was right before this all started, but you know, my spouse and I and some other people, we were pushing back the wokeness against the wokeness in the curriculum. Evanston was sort of the vanguard of that kind of curriculum for a few years, and we really pushed back against it. And I'm really glad that we did, and I'm really glad that I have, you know, letters that were signed by us and 50 other parents. You know, one of the communications that I sent to the then director of equity is actually being used in a court case that a teacher filed, because I documented real-time harms that were occurring to my child, to my daughter. So I'm not saying that's the reason why you document, but just document.
It's a big reason.
Even if you were wrong, right? Like a record of what you said. I'm just a huge fan of that, because you never know. And know that it is all, at least in Illinois, and it sounds like New York too, it is all subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. So like, you know, be mindful of, you are on the record. Usually when you have emails back and forth to your superintendent or your board of education, there could be some redactions that it's subject to under FOIA laws. But
they redact personal info and stuff. But Kevin asked, do you have a link? Yeah, the link is in the description to the YouTube. And super quick, here's one more. And this came out right on the heels. These both came out last week or earlier this week. And this one is very helpful too, which is long COVID symptoms and duration in SARS-CoV-2, positive children. This is a national cohort study. And you guessed it, conclusion, long COVID in children is rare. And mainly short COVID, right?
Long COVID in children, let me just read this out loud. Conclusion, long COVID in children is rare and mainly of short duration, right?
That's
so whenever people say long COVID, I'm like, What is long? Like a year or longer to me is, we're starting to get on the long side. But if it's less than that, I'm like, and is it debilitating? Like, is that what you're saying?
Well, so again, yet another show, an entire show. Long COVID is an amazing topic. So first of all, a lot of our friends are super sympathetic. And again, this study as well, the link is in the description. But again, ammo. Like these are things to send to your board. These are things to send to your, like whoever, share on your local Facebook. Again, might not change their minds immediately, but like the long COVID and the immunocompromised kids are really two kind of focal points of why they are continuing to do this. And so I felt like that these two studies could be very helpful to parents. But what I was going to say is that a lot of our friends, Jay says this, Tracy says this as well, a lot of people, but long COVID exists. It is exactly like if you have a really bad flu, which I've had.
Pneumonia.
Yes. If you get a very bad illness, you can have icky, crappy crap that sticks around with you for a while, right? It really can wreck your body. And I don't think that a lot of people would argue that COVID doesn't do the same thing, right? So therefore long COVID. The problem with long COVID is that there's so many factors that are influencing the definition of long COVID, right? And part of that is honestly the shots. And this is something that, I know a lot of our research friends are looking into, a lot of our doctor friends are looking into. I'm not going to make any declarative statements, but the fact is that if you have a bad reaction, okay, to the shots or your kid does or something, there is a reluctance. It's getting better, but for the last year, there's been a reluctance to acknowledge it, report it, and treat it, okay? And very quickly, there was a workaround that was established. And again, I get it, right? If you have a bad reaction, you're not, you're debilitated, you're hurt. You're going to try and get any help you can. And it seems like the compromise in a lot of situations was to classify these things as long COVID because long COVID is endorsed officially by the Department of Health, by the medical authorities. They admit that it's a thing. There are funds attached to it. And insurance companies, and again, I think that this is slightly outside my expertise, but it seems like insurance companies are more likely to approve things around long COVID versus the other. Okay. So, and again, not a big conspiracy, not saying that. It doesn't even have to be nefarious. I don't think that there's a lot of people out there going, wahaha, we're going to cheat the system. It literally comes down to, once again, fear, politics, money, and, hubris, right? Like all of this stuff is just confounding and distorting a lot of these issues. And again, back to this study, it's like we see, if you look at the data, you don't look at the headlines, you look at the data, long COVID, right? Even with these loose definitions, is thankfully extremely rare and extremely short in children.
Sure. I think a British study of children on the same topic, I'll have to pull it up later, but it hypothesized that it was a similar finding. That long, like people were suffering actually from long pandemic, right? So you're bringing up the possible effects of the vaccine being conflated as post-COVID infection, lingering symptoms. I mean, how can a lot of this be divorced from the incredible mental health and physical health stresses, especially in big blue areas like you and I live in? I mean, these take a toll on your health. I mean, how many people do we know who have gained weight? I mean, serious weight, 20, 30 pounds or more over the course of this pandemic. And I'm not shaming them in any way, but when your government makes you very fearful, it tells you staying home saves lives, watch Netflix, order DoorDash, right? Like, closes the gym or puts restrictions on it.
They close the gyms and they don't even mention like working out or keeping your weight low. Like, helpful.
Right. Tracy in the chat, Tracy Olson works as a lawyer in the insurance industry. We've had her on our podcast before, but she said another term that's being used in the life insurance industry is indirect COVID. That's interesting. What all that
and again, you know, because I work in marketing, I've had over my career, I've had exposure to insurance and, medical systems and pharma.
Hmm.
And I'm not necessarily an expert. I couldn't go into court and testify on this stuff, but like, I get it. I see it's interesting. I can see how these things take hold. I
Hmm.
see how these factors combine to create problems, right? And it
Sure.
doesn't necessarily need the actors to have bad intentions
No,
or greedy intentions.
no,
And as a matter of fact, with long COVID, you have a lot of people who need help,
sure.
right? And they're like willing to get help any way they can.
Right.
And I get it. And to your point about, the stresses, that's one of the big things about fibromyalgia and these other and
Chronic fatigue,
chronic fatigue and even Lyme. Honestly, Lyme disease. I've gone down a whole
gluten
rabbit hole
intolerance, gluten
on.
intolerance.
There you go.
Hmm.
And Alex Berenson did a Substack on this. I don't know if I agree with him wholly, but he takes the stance that a lot of people take, which are most of these things are exaggerated. And again, I don't know enough to make a comment on fibromyalgia or any of this other stuff. I actually know people that have Lyme disease, like long Lyme. They're miserable, right? I
Hmm.
don't know
Sure.
if it's from the tick bite or from gluten. Who knows? But one thing that's very interesting is that prior to like they didn't get a lot of love, right?
Sure.
The Lyme
Sure.
community is famous for just being completely ignored. People with fibromyalgia, this constant pain, they are dismissed, even though there's commercials on TV. It's not a consensus that it's a thing, but there's also not a lot of effort and energy into finding out
Sure.
what it is.
Sure. Whereas, I mean, long COVID, right? Like that's something that you can adopt to your identity, and there's like a certain, I don't want to say cachet to it, but right. I mean, it's being affirmed, right, in so many ways, just on social media, if no place else, or long COVID survivors, and right, like those
Yeah.
kind of groups, I think have gotten a lot of traction. I'm not going to say that those people aren't experiencing certain symptoms. Just for me, it's hard to untangle, and it makes research difficult, probably, that hard to untangle, was this from an actual SARS-CoV-2 infection,
Right.
vaccine effect, pandemic stress effect? Like it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell.
So to Tracy's point, the life insurance industry is trying to avoid directly stating the nexus between the vaccines, contracting a
Hmm.
COVID variant, and adverse vaccine reactions. Again, that completely makes sense to me, right? I understand, financially, like it makes sense that they would be, kind of going at it this direction. And one thing that I noticed that I thought was kind of telling was that if you go down the long COVID rabbit hole, there's a lot of people on Twitter who are long COVID advocates, right? They're influencers. Most of these people have had their full course of shots, right? So again, not saying anything definitively here, but like, wouldn't long COVID be you catch it, nothing else happens, like you don't get the shots, right? Wouldn't that be a pure case of long
Sure.
COVID? At least
Sure.
to me, that would be. I think
Sure.
that once you get the shots, 1, 2, or 3, or 4, you're kind of confounding it because the shots have the spike protein in them,
Right.
right?
But we
So if
keep
you're
trying to reduce the control group.
that's right,
Right.
right,
Or
and
our public health officials do anyway, right? Like
yeah,
get vaccinated, get vaccinated. I mean, I've said to friends, like even from just a pure like research standpoint, like why do you want to have, like, theoretically, why do you want nobody who hasn't gotten the vaccine? Like that just seems like a really bad idea from a research standpoint.
but that's the recommendation.
Hmm.
It really is. If you had COVID and like Tracy's comment here, I know people that can't taste, right?
Right.
But it seems like when they go to the doctor and they go, "Oh my God, I can't taste," or I still am lightheaded, or I have brain fog, or whatever. I think it's from the COVID. Most of them say, "Well, get the shot because that'll help."
Hmm. Hmm.
I just don't
Which
know
I
what
don't
that's.
know why that
I
would
don't know.
help there. If I'm not mistaken, Jay Bhattacharya has tweeted about this before. I think loss of taste or smell is like the most robustly documented, like long COVID, or I would just say
Yes.
post-COVID infection. And it's not unique to COVID, as far as I know. Like, it can happen with other infections. I may have mentioned on this podcast before how my grandma, I mean, she's deceased, but as long as I knew her, she's like, I can't smell. I have no sense of smell. Now, why that was, I don't think that was the case always for her, but like,
Hmm.
did she have an infection and then just lost her sense of
And
smell? I
you
don't
don't know?
know. No, I don't know. And I'm not saying loss of taste and smell isn't a big deal. I mean, I think it does affect your life, but does that justify the mitigations and the mandates? No. So I think that's why I tend to be sort of not sympathetic or turn off to the long COVID conversation. I'm like, okay, yeah, but regardless, like that doesn't justify forcing my daughter to cover her face at school.
It comes back
Right?
to the novel, right?
Right. But it's not. There's just so much we don't know.
And I can't believe I'm saying that. I try not to say this out loud very much, but the novel nature of this thing has driven so much of it, right? I don't understand why they haven't trotted out the lab leak, right? The human made, the chimera, Frankenstein virus as a reason for this. And I think that it might have to do with the fact that Fauci seems to have made this thing, but
yeah, I mean, I actually think if you go back and you think about the messaging, like what I just said, there's just so much we don't know about this virus. And then you consider, oh, wow, maybe they suspected that it might be lab leaked or knew that it was in the very beginning. Some
explains
of this
a lot,
messaging actually makes sense, right?
Explains a
Because
lot
it's
of
like,
what
well,
they
it's
did,
a
right?
coronavirus, like SARS-1. Like, why are you saying like this is so mysterious? But again, hashtag things you would say if it was leaked from a lab.
Right.
and there was human interference that had happened, right? Those are some of the things that you would say. So yeah, well, thanks. Those are two really good studies, and I think you're right, for people to especially at this stage where we have like school boards and governors and other officials, just especially in blue areas, trying to hang on and justify these mitigations, but long COVID in kids, but immunocompromised.
Those are their first two excuses,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, exactly. But I hope I believe that we're seeing the crumbling of, we have some hangers on, in the Hokels and the Pritzkers and the Newsoms, but I do believe that we're moving away from the COVID totalitarianism in schools. I hope. But now we have to pass laws that make sure it doesn't happen again.
And that's a really important point. We've had some parents that were friends of ours that we haven't talked to that much, in the last 2 years, but they have recently, in the last couple of weeks, come around a little bit. They've been like, maybe you're right. Maybe the mask should come off. And mostly it boils down to the fact that they all were vaccinated and they all got COVID anyway. And I think that's a big punch in the teeth,
Yeah.
But you're right. The fact that it's funny because they're like, you know what? We agree with you now. Let's get the masks off. And then you kind of don't want to have that next piece of the conversation because that they are going to be willing to put them right back on next time there's a spike or they think it's going to work in flu season. And yeah, we're going to have to work really hard to disabuse them of
I know.
that.
And I mean, I was telling that to my spouse yesterday. I'm like, if next fall this starts to come back and there's, shutdowns or calls to mask or whatever, I'm like, that may be it for us in this state. Like, I don't know that I can take another season of gloom and doom. And what was dark winter, Joe Biden's dark winter, pandemic of the unvaccinated. Now you have
death and
more
misery.
Boosters. Yeah, right. Death and misery for the unvaccinated. Like, I just can't. Like, how much longer can you subject yourself to that kind of rhetoric? I mean, you can ignore it if you live in a free state, right? Like, you can sort of laugh at it, but when you're living in areas like you and I are, you can't. It's not so funny, right? Because you're feeling the weight of that just as you walk around and go to the grocery, right? It's like you can't escape it. It's not just on a screen. It's not just in a tweet. Like, you're actually living it. So
yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah. So the fight is not over, no matter what. So. Well, I'm going to save the other thing that I was going to show till next time because probably
okay. I have no idea what it was.
Okay.
So
well, it was school board meeting related, and I actually want to wait maybe until there's a little bit more closure on it. I probably should have shown it earlier when we were talking about school boards, but that's okay. No big deal. No big deal. I'll wait till next time. So, all right. Do you have big plans for this weekend?
We have some birthday parties and play dates and things, which are becoming more common again, which is good.
Good. Yeah, that's good. I know, like what oh, do we have some social activity? I think we're going to a basketball game tonight. My husband and I were
Nice.
talking about going out of town tomorrow. Maybe we'll see if grandma can step in. So yeah, I feel it's when I think about this February versus last February and try to focus on like the progress that's been made, I feel good. I think we're in a better spot. Hey, Disney World took off the masks. So
that is true.
So that's something.
We're waiting on some reports though. We got this is President's Week. Obviously,
right.
A bunch of parents up where we are going, and so we're gonna wait.
This is a big weekend for New Yorkers and Midwesterners to go down
Everybody
to Disney, right?
Well, we always we try and kind of zag, when we can. There are some breaks where you kind of have to go on vacation with everybody, but most of the time we'll try and maybe not go when the bulk of everybody goes, because it's kind of nice when everybody flees and there's like less people and you can kind of do some local things. I've always been a fan of doing that.
Yeah. So well, I do want to see how they're actually implementing it down.
That's my point. I want to get some first person reports.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you get reports, let's talk about that next week. Cause I know their policy is like, they're still, what is the word? It's so mean. It's like we still expect people who are unvaccinated to wear masks. But what's funny about that is we know from survey research that vaccinated people are far more likely than unvaccinated people to wear masks. So it's almost comical. It's like Disney World is almost asking vaccinated people to identify as unvaccinated, right? But they still have masks to sell down there. So they got to keep promoting.
It's a profit center now.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, good. Well, enjoy your weekend. Everyone who's in the chat and hung with us, enjoy your weekend as well. And I'll talk to you next week.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.